Welcome to the 2020 Greensteading Summit, presented by the Green Dream Project. This is a special series of videos featuring permaculturists, homesteaders, farmers, gardeners, and people dedicated to sustainable living. We thank you so much for joining us. Green Dream Project had the great honor of speaking with Mr. Joel Salatin to get some of his thoughts on some very important topics. Joel is author of 12 books, co-owner of Polyface Farm and T&E Meats in Virginia, editor of the Stockman Grass Farmer, guest writer and speaker for a number of publications, radio shows, and podcasts. And you can check out his insightful and experience-driven wisdom in his blog, Musings from the Lunatic Farmer.
Man, so it is an absolute honor to be able to talk to you today. The situation we got going on in this country and this world is just, it's crazy. And it's stuff that you've been talking about for years. So we got the COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing major dysfunctions in the U.S. with the food supply chain, dairy farmers dumping milk, grocery store shelves going empty. If you could set up a system for the nation, what might it look like, and how would your design prevent these type of dysfunctions?
How much time do we have? That's a pretty big question. I think in general, I would say that the mega outfit situation has a built-in fragility. It has a bureaucracy. It has an energy use, a footprint that makes it non-resilient in crisis times. For example, my wife and I co-own a federal inspected abattoir here about 30 miles away from us. We employ about 20 people there. We didn't have any work stoppages. The amount of square footage per person with few people in a small facility like that is so much more functional than a mega processing facility. I think a lot of people don't realize that for literally weeks, if not months here, the single largest concentration of shoulder-to-shoulder people in the country has been in these mega processing facilities. Tyson's and Purdue and Cargill, the big beef packers, and many of them, and I'm not xenophobic at all, but many of them use non-local workers, let's just say. And many of these folks are living as cheaply as possible in a foreign country, sending money home to bring family members over to the U.S., to the land of opportunity. I don't fault them for that, but in the farm store this morning, I had a wife of an ICU doctor in North Carolina was here. We're doing our summer children's camp. And so this is one of the parents. Her husband works in the ICU intensive care unit in a North Carolina hospital. He's had several people die, of course, from COVID in the ICU unit. Almost every one of them is a worker in one of these big processing plants. And he had a couple die the other day, both husband and wife. Now their kids are orphans. But when they went to find out the situation, they found that there were 28 people living in a double-wide trailer. These are agricultural workers, immigrants. They don't want to go to the emergency room because they don't have papers. They're not legal U.S. citizens, so they're scared to death. And so they wait till the final minute to go, and then it's too late. The whole mega industrial processing complex is just rife with all of these nuances and threads of fragility. And in a small community plant where people are part of the community and they're not living in a foreign country, they have a way more, workspace. We've got, 2 guys over on the kill floor. We got 3 guys over on the backpack machine, 4 guys at 4 different tables cutting where the work is done by hand, and you have bigger workstations and way fewer people, 20 people as opposed to 3,000 under one roof with the same ventilation system. I mean, these mega plants are dark, they're damp, they're cool, and they have thousands of people crammed into this space with no sunshine, for many of them in a strange country with a lot of stress, eating as cheaply as they possibly can. These facilities, they're set up for disaster. And so in my plan, instead of having 150 mega processing facilities serving 95% of the food in the U.S., what we would have is 10 or 20,000 small plants doing the processing, meat, vegetable packing, whatever it is, and serving kind of a bioregion. If you have that kind of food system, you naturally then move toward a diversified farmscape. as opposed to a monoculture farmscape, you move to a diversified farmscape. What happens is the alleged efficiency of what we've had, the efficiency of it has now been questioned by the resiliency of it. Those are two kind of things you have to balance. I mean, we're all for efficiency, but efficiency to the exclusion of resiliency is actually not efficient, because when it breaks down, you've got nothing.
Right. So definitely keep them smaller, keep them more local, and you'll end up being much more sustainable in the long run.
Absolutely. It might not be the cheapest, but it won't externalize all the costs either. I mean, I haven't talked about the externalized costs of the, the industrial system. I mean, a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico, who pays for all those shrimp that aren't being grown and all the fishermen that don't have a livelihood now because of the toxicity of the water that's a direct result of monocrops being grown with chemical fertilizers to go into factory houses, to go into industrial scale complexes, to be shipped 1,500 miles outside the community to some other place, where 75% of everything that goes in a landfill is biodegradable. The whole system is broken and dysfunctional. And so if we bring it home, bring it to the region, and create food stability and security within a region. I don't want to get into a debate about what's a region. Is it 50 miles, 100? I'm just saying in a region. That's good enough for me, and it would push people to be more diversified. And what would happen then, if people actually paid attention to that, is that the market would begin to patronize the regional producers. And because of the localization of it, the inherent transparency with localization creates its own inherent auditing and vetting. When you have razor wire fence and guard towers around everything that produces food, it's very easy to cheat and take shortcuts and do things that the average person wouldn't want done, because it's a very opaque system. And so as you democratize and decentralize rather than centralizing and amalgamating, you necessarily move toward a more transparent food custody chain that people are aware of, and they see, that's where they make the French fries over there. It's right there in the neighborhood, and you can see what's coming out the back door, what's going in the front door, and the smells that are coming out of the kitchen, and that creates a certain amount of accountability within the system.
Get to see how the sausage is being made, so to speak.
Right. Absolutely.
With this crisis that's been happening, I think a lot of people are trying to move toward sustainability, trying to grow their own food. People are getting excited about that, starting vegetable gardens, orchards, food forests. But at the same time, there's been a movement away from growing grass, as grass is sometimes viewed as being ornamental or useless. You've called yourself a grass farmer, and I've talked about how grasses can benefit the environment. How might a small farm or homestead benefit from including grass in the overall design for producing food?
I take a pretty big difference between lawn and grass farming. I don't consider lawn grass farming. I'm a big believer in lawns probably should be converted to vegetable operations and more productive pursuits. But when I think of grass, I'm thinking of grass that's feeding livestock or a place for livestock to be, as opposed to a factory farm. In nature, there are three kinds of plants in general. There's trees, there's woody species like shrubs and bushes, and then grasses, or all the forages, the tender forages. And of the three kinds, the one that is the most efficient at converting solar energy into biomass is not trees or bushes, it's actually grasses. It's counterintuitive, because you look at those trees and you say, well, look at all that biomass, but that's a 40, 50, 60 year accumulation of biomass. If you took all of your lawn clippings and kept them for 60 years in a pile, and you were able to produce that pile at a point in time in 60 years, you'd realize that grass does far more biomass than the tree or the bush. Grass has historically been the place where the deepest soils on the planet, the Great Plains of America, the Pampas of Argentina, the steppes of Mongolia, the Serengeti of Africa, the deepest soils, the best and most fertile soils on the planet are always not under forest, they're under prairies. They're under a grass-based ecosystem with herbivores on top. People say, well, herbivores are inefficient. Yes, they're inefficient, and that's why there's enough energy left over to grow soil. If everything were as efficient as a watermelon and a squash, we wouldn't have any soil. The fact that these herbivores especially are inefficient and return so much to the land in a concentrated form is why they, along with the grasses, have been the places where the deepest soils on the planet have been developed. And in fact, our current monocropping system of corn and soybeans and wheat and rice generally is mining what nature took centuries to build with perennials. Annuals tend to extract soil because they extract soil and put something up in a big vegetable or produce or fruit or seed or something. But perennials build soil because their energy flow is down into the soil. They have to be able to withstand tornadoes, drought, floods, and live another day. Annuals depend on seeds to live another day. So they put everything in this seed above the ground. They extract energy and put all their energy in something above the ground, whereas perennials make very, very small seeds and they put everything down in the ground. And so the energy flow is different. That's why the deep soils on the planet have been built under perennials and not annuals. And to my knowledge, there's really certainly no scalable organic production system that is animalless. All of them use, whether it's fish, something extracted from the sea, something extracted from chickens or cows or something as a fertility supplement. The very best, organic producers in the world bring in loads of compost and material that's generated by animals. In nature, there is no animal-less ecosystem. And in nature, animals aren't in factory houses. They're on pastures, they're on grass, they're running around. One of the most significant reasons for animals in nature is because before machinery, animals are the only way to democratize fertility. If you think about it, gravity is moving biomass, minerals downhill. It's all tending down to the valley. So the animal, bird, herbivore, whatever, but the animal then goes and grazes or eats, pecks away in that fertile valley, and then flies or walks up to the hilltop because of predation. So they want to be able to look out and make sure there aren't any predators. And they go up there and lounge and then poop and urinate. And the poop and the urine up on the hilltop then can move down the slope down into the valley. And so the animal walking or flying, moving from the fertile valley to the infertile hilltop is what actually spreads and democratizes fertility in the ecosystem. There's some really cool ecological functions for animals in the ecosystem. The problem is not the animals. The problem is that we have disrespected the role and the function that animals play. And then that creates all sorts of crazy data points. And you get things like, the UN Long Shadow Report and Cowspiracy and the Game Changers and all this, the Lancet, Eat Lancet report. And you get all this stuff based on very, very faulty data points created by faulty domestic animal husbandry, when if we actually mimic the kind of movement and synergistic relational complexity of animals in nature, those data points wouldn't exist. And so you wouldn't have all the issues involved.
That's great stuff because, you constantly hear about how well forests and stuff build soils, and they do. But it was from you that I learned quite how well grasslands actually build soil, and I think that's really important information.
The insurance program, which used to be the subsidy program, it doesn't really recognize grass as a crop. It only recognizes corn and soybeans and rice and sugarcane and wheat. We have a problem as a culture when the only thing we incentivize is something that inherently destroys the soil. That's not a good legacy statement. It doesn't bode well for our future.
In our situation, so we live in Arizona in the desert Southwest. We're experiencing what they're calling a mega drought. The aquifers are shrinking. We're seeing fissures and sinkholes in the area. People's wells are going dry. And at the same time, we have these large monocrop agricultural operations moving into our rural areas, probably because there's cheap land here and less restrictive groundwater regulations. They're drilling these wells that are 1,000 feet deep or deeper and essentially exporting that groundwater overseas. So we have, hay that's going to the Middle East or nuts that are going to China. We've kind of questioned whether practices like this are sustainable or a responsible use of resources. But we've had people tell us these large growing operations, they have the money, they have this high-tech equipment, and their businesses. Why wouldn't they want to be efficient? I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, and how does a small-scale farm or a homestead compare to an industrial operation in terms of efficiency and productivity if these smaller growing operations can't afford high-tech, state-of-the-art equipment?
First of all, I would suggest that any farming operation that reduces the commons is a detriment to society. That's a strong statement. The commons is the air, soil, water. We could even say there's social elements as well to the commons. It's the shared resource equity that we have by virtue of living in a place and being part of a community. So if an agricultural operation, I would even say if a microchip maker or a solar energy installer, if they're using more water than lands on the property that they manage, they're creating a net loss, for example, to the hydrology of the region, of the area. So that's one reason why in permaculture, the whole idea is to try to hold raindrops as high on the landscape as possible for as long as possible and get multiple use out of those raindrops before they get somewhere. See, the problem is that much of the developed, New Zealand, Australia, the United States, Canada, were all settled by primarily British, but including Germans, especially by the United Kingdom. And I love the English. This is not xenophobic. This is not anti-foreign, but it's just that there, where it's a misty, moisty morning, very high rainfall, they see water as a drainage problem. And most parts of the world, water is not a drainage problem. It's a hydration problem. We don't want to get rid of the water. We want to hold the water. This is an entire cultural mentality. So you have Colorado. I don't know how it is in Arizona, but in Colorado, you have laws, for example, prohibiting the use of rain barrels because that's considered hoarding water, when actually a rain barrel slows down the drainage and gets those raindrops used multiple times. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a huge pond advocate. Every time we get a couple $1,000, we build another pond, and we built ponds and ponds. And people don't realize that 500 years ago, 8% of North America was water. 8%. Today, it's like 1%. Where did all that water come from? It was beaver ponds. We had 200 million beavers. And we now know that some of them were as big as a Volkswagen automobile. They were big beavers, and they made big ponds. And this includes in the Southwest. Even very dry areas like Arizona and Nevada, Utah had large beaver pond, beaver lakes made by beavers. This hydrology in the landscape does all sorts of amazing things, from ambient temperature mitigation when it's hot to transpiration, cloud formation, all sorts of things, hydrating the landscape. We know more about that in Australia than we do here, partly because Australia was settled so recently. And so there's a lot more diary books and history books that were written during that time of changing from Aboriginal resource management to European resource management in Australia. And perhaps one of the reasons why Australia leads the world in the most cutting edge water retention. P.A. Yeomans grew up there. You've got Peter Andrews, you've got Darren Dougherty, probably the number one waterscape guy on the planet. Obviously, Bill Mollison and Dave Holmgren developed permaculture there. Why? Well, because it's such a fragile area, but it also has money. And so there's money to experiment and innovate and do things, as opposed to a lot of dry areas of the planet that don't have money. The Sahel, India, perhaps Pakistan, and some of the other areas. So what I'm getting at is the strategy needs to be slowing down the water drainage. You guys live in a very arid area, but and I know, even in a mega drought, there are 4, 5, 6 days a year where torrents come down and water runs everywhere. And the arroyos, I think that's what you call them, right? The big, deep arroyos, those run full, right? If that water could be impounded in ponds, permaculture style, high on the landscape, it would turn those dry areas into a verdant Eden, into an oasis. It's not how much water do you get, it's how much water do you save. That's the question. And so whether it's xeriscaping, landscaping, or whatever it is, the whole idea is to retain that water. So these center pivot irrigation systems that green the desert, yeah, they are quite amazing, but they're fundamentally extractive of the hydrology and the ecosystem. Just imagine if every, let's just say farm business, let's not include any other business, but just say every farm business had to operate only on the amount of water that landed on its deeded property. You'd see some creativity in water management like you've never seen before. That would be pretty cool. I think a lot of that can happen. And you're right, we're literally exporting our water. The Southwest of America is desertifying, that's a fact. And there seems to be no impediment to exploiting the commons. I mean, so at the end of the day, we're still basically conquistadors. We're conquistadors in pinstripe suits, but we're conquistadors nonetheless. Now, if we move to the efficiency, there's a big difference between efficiency and effectiveness. You can be efficient all day. You can be so efficient driving the wrong way on the interstate that you're making great time, but it's not very effective. We assume that if you're efficient, you're also effective, but that's not true at all. Stan Parsons, who developed the Ranching for Profit schools, used to say, we've become extremely efficient at hitting the bullseye of the wrong target. And so I'm all about let's be effective and not efficient, which brings me then to the smaller scale person that doesn't have the, all the high tech and techno-glitzy material. But as Wendell Berry so eloquently says, if you're going to treat a piece of land correctly, you can only be intimately aware of so much land. And as soon as you move past your personal observational awareness of a piece of land, then you cease to be able to caress our ecological womb correctly. And so often, I think in agriculture, we've got this idea that we're in this wrestling match with nature. I've got to get you in I'm going to make you do this. And we have this kind of adversarial relationship where actually nature is a benevolent lover and just wants to be appreciated in the right ways, in the right places. At our farm, we are very quick to appreciate that our kind of farming takes more farmers and more people on the land, but we think that's actually an asset, not a liability, because more people on the land know it better, know it more intimately, and by having, as Wes Jackson says, a better eyes to acre ratio, it actually creates more authenticity and integrity in the relationship than when you don't have very many eyes on the acreage. When your eyes are a GPS satellite and a computer console, there's not much integrity in that relationship. And so we purposely exchange infrastructure, pharmaceuticals, and energy intensity, pharmaceutical intensity, and capital intensity. We purposely exchange that for people, which means our equity is now not in infrastructure. Our equity now is in skill, and it's in knowledge, and it's in customers. And there's not a banker in the world that can ever foreclose on your knowledge or repossess your skill. And so that moves us from physical equity to non-physical equity. It actually moves us from a dollars-oriented wealth to a non-dollars-oriented wealth. I think in general, that's a very positive movement.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in our experience, we've just recently started a homestead out here. Mm-hmm. And one thing I think we've just really been blown away by in this experience is having a sense of connection with nature and with the food that we're producing. It has really had a profound impact on us, in our life, on just the way we view the world. Could you talk a little bit about how having that connection has impacted your life?
Well, absolutely. People say, what gets you up in the morning? And what gets me up in the morning is the profound opportunity, privilege, if you will, to step out into this ecological womb, into creation, and participate. Very few people viscerally participate in life. We participate in, video games, fantasy, Fortune 500 companies, building castles on the laptop at the end of a Dilbert cubicle in an expressway, or today, I guess, in your home, in your home office. But there's very little reality in life, and it's one of the reasons why we see so much reality TV. We see people going on pilgrimages and vacation experiences that are adrenaline pushers. I always say, I don't need to go to a theme park. When I'm cutting down a tree and it falls the wrong direction, I get all the adrenaline rush I need. I don't need to go. And so, yes, to be anchored and connected in a place and see it change over time and know that my touch, my hands can make that change, can either be hurtful or healing. These hands can either hurt or heal. And the longer you're on a place, the more opportunity there is to be able to see what your activities have created there. And essentially, every landscape is a physical manifestation of the management that's been put on that landscape for a period of time. And so in the future, the landscape that we're going to have is also going to be a physical manifestation of the different things that we've done with it over a period of time. We had an apprentice from Sonora, Mexico, and we went down to visit him and met his grandmother. This is years and years, this is 20 years ago. And his grandmother was still alive, and she was a little girl in the early 1900s. And they were a pretty wealthy family. They sent her to boarding school up in British Columbia. Once a year, she would travel, as a little girl from Sonora there in Hermosillo area up to British Columbia. She talked about how you could never see the landscape because the vegetation was so tall along the roadside that you couldn't see out to see what the edge of the road looked like. I mean, you could if you got up on a hill or something like that, but there was so much vegetation. Well, today, for hundreds of miles, there's hardly anything. It's just desert. And the same thing was true in Arizona. When John Wayne went there as a cattle rancher, in the Western movies, those big ranches in the West, they're not there. The amount of carrying capacity, the amount of vegetation is nothing compared to what it used to be. And when you realize that it is the bacteria that comes off the vegetation that gives water vapor a particle to condense on, which cools the atmosphere, cools the earth, and makes clouds, you realize that there's a negative reinforcement cycle that when you start to deplete the vegetation with improper land management, whether it's tillage, overgrazing, or whatever it is, when you start to diminish that vegetative cover on the landscape, you diminish the bacteria in the atmosphere, then you diminish the condensation of water vapor, and then you diminish cloud formation, now you diminish rains, and the whole thing is a vicious negative cycle. What's beautiful about cycles is, just like a certain cycle can make it negative, you can reverse it and make it positive. And so things like swales, like gentle ponds, like rain barrels, things to slow down those raindrops, get more use out of them, and have vegetation where there was bareness before. Each of those things can move a desert environment to a more vegetated environment. I know there's some permaculture projects, for example, in Lebanon, that are fairly small projects. I mean, we're talking about 2 square miles maybe, which is not that big, and literally in 5 years doubled the rainfall actually and turned on almost into an oasis by creating a microclimate of vegetation. And so we need to be developing vegetation. And it breaks my heart to go down through the southwestern US and realize that places that used to support families and even ranch schools, because there were so many families living on a ranch, for example, and now there's one family and there are no people and it's just desert. I was on a big place in Australia. A guy was buying it. It was 100,000 acres up in Queensland, and they had the original ranch books from like 1820, when the original European went and got it the first time. And they had the ranch books all the way up. For the first 40 years, that ranch supported, imagine this, 28,000 cows. 28,000 cows, okay? Today, they have 5,000 cows, and it's way overgrazed. They should drop to 3,000 cows. That is strictly a management issue. It's not climate. It's nothing more than management. While that is a very depressing thought that we can be that negative on the landscape, it's a very hopeful thought that we can also be that positive on the landscape. So if we messed it up, we can correct it. That's the ultimate hopeful lesson.
So last question. One of the goals is to show people the power individuals have in creating change and being a positive impact in the world. It's easy to understand how a person might feel discouraged or disheartened about the state of the world when they see terrible things happen. They start to feel powerless to do anything about it. They might think, I'm not rich, I'm not famous, I'm not powerful to make a real difference. What might you say to someone that's feeling this way?
Well, never underestimate the power of one. Too often we get paralyzed by the sheer overwhelmingness. I don't think that's a word, but the overwhelmingness, I'll use it anyway. You know what I'm saying? Of the situation. And I get that. Certainly you can, if you watch the news very much, you'll certainly feel powerless. So this is why you need to balance. If you watch the news for half an hour, go out and work in your garden for half an hour. The therapy of participating in the awesomeness, the mystery, the magic of life, putting that seed in the ground. Think about the sheer wisdom of a seed that can sit there for years, and then suddenly the right conditions are created for it, and that seed suddenly knows, okay, now it's time to sprout. Now I can do this. That's a tremendous amount of wisdom. And so every single person can do something positive. Maybe it's just getting 3 chickens and having them eat the kitchen scraps so that the garbage truck doesn't haul kitchen scraps away. And you get eggs. Okay, so now you don't have to buy eggs. Pat Foreman, in her wonderful book, City Chicks, talks about a city in Belgium, in Europe, that did a program where they offered 3 chickens to any family that wanted 3 chickens. They had 2,000 families raise their hands, say, yeah, I'll take 3 chickens. And so the city bought 6,000 chickens and gave them to 2,000 families. And the first month, they reduced their landfill deposits by 100 tons in just a month, the first time. So little things can have big impacts. I think that rather than dwelling on the magnitude of situations, instead, let's look inside, let's look at ourselves, say, well, what can I do? Instead of feeling powerless to look out there and say, well, I can't this, I can't this, I can't this, I can't this. Well, look inside instead. Instead of looking at how big things are, look how small things can be. You can get a little worm kit to put under your sink and put your kitchen scraps in the worm kit. You can have vertical gardens where you can get, PVC pipes with pockets in them, and hang them on your porch, a beehive on the roof. There's so many things that you can do. Convert your landscaping to edible landscaping. I don't have any problem with flowers and ornamentals, but it doesn't take any more care to keep an edible landscape tree than it does just an ornamental landscape tree. So think about edible landscaping. These are all things that a person can do that's within your purview. Stephen Covey writes about this in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He says, work on your sphere of influence. It's depressing when you look outside your sphere of influence. And the truth is that when we concentrate on our sphere of influence, our actual influence, the people we influence actually expand. When all we do is fritter away our emotional energy on stuff that we can't influence, our sphere of influence actually shrinks. So if you want to expand your sphere of influence, quit worrying about what you can't influence and come home and think about what you can, and that will ultimately lead by example, and you will have actually a larger sphere of influence by thinking small and what can I do than by thinking big and being depressed about what you can't do. And so, that's my encouragement to folks. And ultimately, you can't make somebody else do something. You can't change somebody else, even in your own family. But what you can do is you can change you. Our world is desperate for people who actually participate and take seriously being the change they want to see. We have sold ourselves a bill of goods that in order for things to change, somebody else has to make a change. I'm a victim. I can't make a change unless you make a change. And that's so disempowering. It's much more empowering to say, I can't do it all and I can't do everything. There again, we've depressed ourselves by teaching our children. We've told our kids, oh, you can be whatever you want to be. No, you can't be whatever you want to be. I will never be an artist. I could want to draw as much as anybody, but I can't draw a stick man. So I'll never be an artist. If you're short and fat, you won't play in the NBA. I don't care how much you want to play in the NBA, So we don't need to sell people a false hope you can do or be whatever you want to be. What we need to do is you discover what you can do and then do it 110%. We can't all write books. We can't all speak. We can't all run for election. We can't all whatever it is that you might want to do. But everybody can do something. And discovering that and then doing it 110% in the right direction will chip away at the deficit, the dysfunctional deficit in the culture. And at the end of the day, if everybody started doing that, the Chinese have the proverb, if everybody sweeps in front of their own doorstep, the whole world would be clean. I pretty much adhere to that. I think if everybody did that, the world would be clean, in fact.
Be that change you want to see in the world and just do what you can with where you're at.
That's right.
Thank you so much for talking with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, we encourage folks to look at your situation, and sometimes you have to change your situation a little bit to actually, get to where you need to be. But, change is good. And in fact, this whole pandemic thing, I think is, as you mentioned, it's pushing people to make changes. We've never seen so many people want to come out to the farm and buy 3 chickens for a backyard flock. We've never seen people so much want to buy seed. Freezers. I mean, you can't buy a freezer. Now you're not going to be able to get canning goods. I mean, and those are all very, very positive things. And it's really exciting to have people talk about, well, I've spent more time in the kitchen the last 3 weeks than I've ever spent, and I'm learning to like it. That's a very positive thing. Isn't it the Japanese that the word for crisis is the same one for opportunity? And so it's just how you look at it.
Yeah.
And so out of this crisis, may opportunity germinate.
Absolutely. Man, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to check out the other summit videos as well. They'll be available for a limited time on the Green Dream Project YouTube channel. Remember to check out the links in the video description for more information on our speakers and to find out how to get access to all the summit videos to watch anytime.